So thank you all for coming. Welcome. This is a forum on the proposed ban on the retail sale of recreational marijuana. We've got a panel here. I'm going to briefly just go over the agenda. I think you have this. We will have an introduction to the regulation. Then I will briefly introduce the panel members. And then the panel members will give their respective comments. We'll take a break. And then there will be time for questions and answers. And I think you were all instructed or asked if you would please write the questions on a card and pass them up. I will be able to ask the questions over the microphone so that people who watch this on LCAT afterwards will be able to hear. And then final comments by the board members. So I'm going to turn it over to the chairman of the East Long Meadow Board of Health, Dr. Sarah Perez-McAdoo, so that they can open their public meeting.
Good evening. So I'm going to do the Board of Health Chairman's announcement in accordance with Massachusetts General Law. The Board of Health is recording. Is anyone else recording?
No cat's recording.
Okay.
All right. First, I'm going to introduce the regulation. So in November of 2016, the voters of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts approved question 4 on the state election ballot. That question asked if it would be legal to use and sell recreational marijuana throughout the Commonwealth. Tonight's forum is being sponsored by the Board of Health to put the question on a ballot on the June 8th town election to ask the voters of East Long Meadow if, under a local option, they will or will not choose to ban the retail sale of recreational marijuana in East Long Meadow. All right. Now I'll introduce the panel. So I'm going to start to my immediate right, Denise Menard, town manager. Prior to being appointed acting and then permanent town manager for the town of East Long Meadow, Denise was the first selectman for the town of East Windsor for 8 years. Additionally, she was a volunteer member for planning, finance, selectmen, pension, water pollution control, and elderly boards throughout the past 30 years. Denise holds an associate's degree in paralegal studies and bachelor's degree in business management from St. Joseph's College in West Hartford, Connecticut. She has been a Rotarian for approximately 25 years, a past president, and a Paul Harris Fellow. Jeff D'Alessio, police chief. Oh, I skipped over Gordon. Sorry, I've got them numbered here, but they're not in the order on the paper. Sorry, guys. Gordon Smith, superintendent of schools. Prior to becoming superintendent of schools in East Long Meadow, Gordon Smith was the principal of Ludlow High School, and prior to being principal, he was assistant principal of East Long Meadow High School. Mr. Smith has taught at the high school and middle school levels in school districts in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Now, Chief Jeffrey D'Alessio, East Long Meadow Police Department. Chief D'Alessio has been an employee of the town of East Long Meadow since 1986. Chief D'Alessio was promoted to sergeant in 2002 and has been chief of police since April of 2016. In 1999, Chief D'Alessio graduated from Curry College in Milton, Mass. All right, so to my left, the chairman of the Board of Health, Dr. Sarah Perez-McAdoo. Dr. McAdoo holds a master's degree in public health from Harvard University, where she focused on community health and programming. Prior to receiving her master's degree, she was a practicing OBGYN, and most recently, Dr. McAdoo is the director of Youth Empowerment Adolescent Health Network. Her work has been recognized at the state, local, state, and national level. Next is Karen Robitaille.
No, Kevin. We switched chairs on him.
Yeah, well, it's not really that complicated. Dr. Kevin Hinchy, MD, Board of Health. Dr. Hinchy is responsible for the strategic planning and operations for the Department of Medicine at Bay State Hospital, where he is active in both leadership and education. Karen Robitaille, Karen has been a registered nurse for over 20 years and has spent a majority of that time in school nursing. Karen is also the program director for Northampton's Prevention Coalition, a youth substance prevention organization. And at the end, Amy Petrosky, health director, town of East Long Meadow. Amy became the full-time health director in November of 2014. Amy has been in the public health field since 2008 and is a graduate of Smith College. So thank you all. And I think I will start with Dr. McAdoo.
Sure, I can begin. So thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I know it's very busy, but this is a really important issue, so we're very happy that you have joined us. I want to begin to just tell you a little bit of the work that the Board of Health has been doing, myself and my colleagues. So over the past few months, the Board of Health members in our town's health department have been studying the new recreational marijuana law. We obtain input from experts in the legal, medical, and public health field to really better understand the law and the health implications of this law. So as the Board of Health and the Health Department, our responsibility includes protecting and improving the health of the residents of East Longmeadow. The health impact of marijuana on youth and children cannot be ignored. In East Longmeadow, we have a higher percentage of families with children under the age of 18 compared to the county, state, and national average. And this is precisely the group that is the most vulnerable to the health impacts of marijuana. So, as we know, marijuana is one of the most commonly used illicit substance that is used among adolescents. The developing brain is particularly susceptible to alcohol, marijuana, and other substances. And research using new techniques to study the brain structure and function suggests that marijuana use can alter the developing brain. And this is very important because brain development is not complete until we're in our mid-20s. Marijuana can impair memory and concentration, decrease attention span, as well as also interfere with problem solving. And this all impacts the ability of youth to learn. Marijuana use among adolescents can also lead to alterations in motor control, coordination, judgment, reaction time, and tracking ability. And all of this can all contribute to unintentional death and injuries, such as motor vehicle accidents. There are also reports of toxic ingestion of marijuana by children. So this is very important because the sale of recreational marijuana includes edibles, which are cannabis-infused food that can be ingested. And there are many varieties of the edibles. They include cookies and lollipops, brownies, gummy bears, cakes, hard candy, chocolate bars, soda, tincture, and that's just to name a few. Now, normally, the health department inspects business establishments that sell food. This new law does not address the ability of the local Board of Health to license, regulate, or inspect establishments that sell marijuana or related products such as these edibles. So this is very concerning for the following reasons. One is that edibles are the fastest growing market for marijuana, and it comprises of 50% of the sales in Colorado. The edibles are in appetizing forms, making them easily attractive to children. Edibles can be overconsumed by users because the onset of the psychoactive effect is delayed, and there is no entity currently in place to assure compliance with health and safety regulations. So this becomes even more concerning because the Cannabis Control Commission is in charge of putting together the regulations for implementation. But if they do not release their regulations by the deadline of June of 2018, any medical marijuana establishment can automatically start selling recreational marijuana, including edibles, without any active regulatory system in place. And this does not protect the health of residents in any community. So what can be done? The way the law is written, a town can prohibit the operation of retail cannabis establishments by voting to ban the retail sale of recreational marijuana. The proposed ban does not ban personal use, personal growth of cannabis for adults 21 and over. It does not ban medicinal use of marijuana. As you stated earlier, in November, the town of East Long Meadow voted against legalization, the town itself, not the state. The town itself voted against legalization of recreational marijuana, putting the question on the ballot to ban retail sale of recreational marijuana at the annual town election this June allows residents of East Long Meadow to support a solution that protects the health of children and youth in our town and will make our town a healthier place to raise a family. So why is this so important right now? Well, the timing of the East Long Meadow annual election is very important. At a forum that some of us had attended, that was hosted by the Massachusetts Municipal Lawyers Association and the Massachusetts Municipal Association, we learned that legislative changes to the law are months away, regulations are about a year away, and most importantly, it may take years for the legal issues related to this law to be resolved. So it became clear that towns have to address the issue now. The only time that East Long Meadow voters have their voices heard will be at the annual town election this June. A year from now, our town will no longer have the opportunity to vote, leaving children and youth without protection from the negative health impacts of this law.
Thank you. Dr. No.
Sarah spoke for the whole board.
So we did right.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think that as we, later on when we open up to questions, my colleagues and I will also be able to answer more in depth.
Chief,
I'm next.
you're next.
Perfect. Thanks for all you coming here tonight and attending.
You may need to pull that a little closer.
Better? Thank you for all coming tonight and attending it. It was an important, must be an important topic for you guys to show up, and we appreciate that.
Speak a little louder.
Louder?
Louder.
That's the first time. Can you hear me now?
Oh,
All
there
right.
you go.
Try it again. Again, thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate it, taking time out of your busy lives to attend this meeting tonight. It must be important for you because you're here, and that's great. There's people that are not here, and that's another issue. But from a law enforcement side, we can look at it from the same as alcohol. Colorado was one of the first states to move on the recreational part. They're still going through their pros and cons with it. I think down the road, there'll be studies made on progression of states that legalize the drug and recreational use, what we're here about tonight. So to find out the exact impact on a town or a city could be years away. But on a health aspect of it, I think the signs are already out there. From law enforcement, how it affects us, I think we're a little years away, but I can tell you that the statistics for impairment driving is up in most of the states. I think it was in Colorado. Hospital visits that we deal with medicals are up, dealing with people that ingest the edibles. And so those are the things that law enforcement are going to be getting involved in. The operation of the vehicle on a public way under the influence has not changed with this new law. The only thing that changed is the possession of it. Forget about the legalization on the medical side. Let's look at it from just a legalization overall. I can bore you with a bunch of numbers tonight of what the do's and don'ts on our possession, but that's really, I'll give them to you, but it's not really why you're here. You want to know what the health effects are going to be on a recreational facility in your yard, in your town rather. But I can tell you that simple possession of marijuana for people over 21 up to an ounce is acceptable out in the public. You still can't smoke or distribute out in the public. That would be illegal. Possession in your house and able to grow up to 6 plants for a single occupant is legal. 12 plants for more than one adult in the house for plants is legal. And let me remind you, about one plant, full-grown plant, will produce about a pound of marijuana. So in theory, if you're allowed to have 12 plants, up to 12 plants in your house, you're allowed to have 12 pounds at some point in time in there. And that's just for legalize it. And then you look at the possession of it, and then if you look at the illegal side of it, if you want to look into that, how we're going to enforce any kind of people that take advantage of the law, that's a tough call on our part as far as getting into people's homes. Everybody's got rights and stuff like that. So it's going to put pressure on our enforcement of illegal homegrown activities. But that's a challenge we face every day with any other kind of case where we deal with narcotics. The possession of marijuana in these quantities is merely decriminalized, but not fully legalized. Schools and government buildings will still be off limit for possession of any amount of marijuana on the grounds, whether they're public or private preschools, K through 12 schools, or grounds with any correctional facility, which doesn't apply to us. Simple possession of marijuana outside their primary residence may be up to 2 ounces. Between 1 and 2 ounces we can take action on civilly. Up over 2 ounces out in the public would be a civil violation. Possession of marijuana inside the house, again, for ages of 21 and up, you're allowed to possess 10 ounces. Remember that figure? And I can tell you right now, if you want to look at the illegal side of marijuana, a pound of marijuana is going for about, depending on the quality and the grade, and I'll remind you that the quality and grade of marijuana today is not what it was 30 years ago. It's higher in the THC content. Higher the content means the more under the influence you're going to be with less amount. But I can tell you right now, on average, a pound of marijuana can be from $3,500 to $4,500. So for those of the older people in the crowd, if you can relate back to the days when you might have been around it in one shape or form, those numbers are astronomical. So you can see where the illegal side of the business is really profitable and has taken off throughout the country. Not just, Massachusetts is dealing with this problem. Everybody throughout the country is dealing with it. So possession of any quantity of marijuana with intent to still remains a violation. So again, I can throw you a bunch of boring numbers on what it is, but I can guarantee you that what you think is criminalized is probably not going to be. 21 years old and above, under an ounce, you're illegal. 1 to 2 ounces, civil fine of $100. This is if you don't have a license to sell, and the license to sell would come into the recreational use and people that are caregivers and stuff like that are possession. Over 2 ounces, you do face some criminal penalties. 18 to 21, civil fine for $100 under an ounce. Criminal penalties apply for 1 to 2 ounces, along with anything over 2 ounces. Now, an ounce of marijuana is about the size of my fist, so multiply that times 16 to get your pound, and you can tell it's pretty huge quantity. Juveniles under 18, civil fine of $100, mandatory drug education program. Delinquency proceedings available for people that carry 1 to 2 ounces, and over 2 ounces, delinquency proceedings available again. So it sounds like you'd be in trouble if you carried like 2 ounces of marijuana. Well, you would be on a civil side, but not so much under 2 ounces and under on the criminal side. Again, I'm not going to try to bore you with too much. I'll make these available to anybody that wants these charts. But trafficking, 50 pounds in the state of Massachusetts, illegal. 50 pounds of marijuana. I mean, that's a lot. It's a lot. School zones, the question 4 did not repeal or modify any of the school zone statutes. That still remains in effect. Public consumption of marijuana. Under the new law, all public consumption of marijuana other than medical marijuana is prohibited. So if you think you're going to be able to walk down the street and have a joint in public, that's not the case. There is consequences. Operating under the influence has not changed as far as the use of marijuana. It's been long-standing that anything with a glue, a vapor, narcotics, alcohol, that has not changed for OUIs. It's pretty much on the legal side, the court side. So there's not a lot of there's a lot of leniency moving forward in the court system as far as the minor in possession of a juvenile, but that's the legislator's decision. I would say to you guys, as a community looking to move ahead with this new law, it's not going to change the law enforcement aspect of it as much as far as motor vehicle. The penalties are still there, but what you have to look at is how it affects your health, your kids' health, and the availability to them moving forward. And I think that's what you guys should really concentrate on. So I'll leave it with that for now.
Here. Good evening. I'm Gordon Smith, Superintendent of Schools. Thank you for coming out. I know spring evenings are very busy all throughout town. My interest, happy to take part in this panel, excited to take part in this panel. My main interest is student safety. We deal with the population that has been explained by two different speakers to be most at risk. On a daily basis, my focus is the learning of students in pre-K through grade 12. That's ages 3 to 18. And as was stated earlier, brain development does not finish or is not completed until mid-20s. So as this new law and the subsequent regulations start to take hold, it could be a situation where historically schools have always dealt with, especially middle school and high school students, as they begin to try to identify who they are. They're also at the height of their risk-taking behavior and being influenced by peer pressure. And historically, schools have dealt with issues with alcohol as those type of decisions and risk-taking behaviors start to happen with students as they start to mature. Now, as this new regulation or new law rolls out with subsequent regulations, it's almost creating marijuana to be parallel to alcohol. And so the concern there would be certainly that we would see an increase possibly in decisions to experiment with marijuana. So happy to be here, excited to get to the question portion. My main interest is student safety. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us all this evening. I was asked here because I'm the sort of the voice of the council. Don, I don't. He's screeching. Better?
Go ahead. Yep.
The town council in April voted to, they were approached by the Department of Health to consider putting a question on the ballot that would prohibit the sale of marijuana in East Longmeadow. And there have been questions about why they did that. So I am here to sort of represent their way of thinking on that. And I think it is twofold. Number one is that in East Longmeadow, it was not at the state level, at the state election, it was not passed here in East Longmeadow. There was 46% of the voters voted yes to legalize it, recreational marijuana. 54% voted against legalizing marijuana. So in the positive, that meant that they were saying no to recreational marijuana here in East Longmeadow. The council felt that with that statement by the voters that went to a state election, which is usually a pretty good participation at the state level, that to have the voters again take it to the local level and see if it was something that they felt strongly enough that they wanted to prohibit it now was something that should be the option of the voters, not to just let it happen. They feel that it's a question to be that's important enough, that they want the transparency, that it's not something that should have been just left to the council to decide. If we do nothing, it then is allowed. So they feel very strongly that the voice in government should be the voters, and we hope that everybody will come out and voice their opinion in June.
All right, thank you, Denise. Before I turn it over to Amy Petrosky, the Health Director, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, and I really hope you do have questions. We've had a couple of presentations in the past, 2 months, I would say. The Board of Health has given presentations with a lot of information before the school committee as well as the town council. We had a speaker at the high school, Dr. Lynn Lyons, talking about anxiety, and that is a significant issue among the school population and kids in general. And then last week, Dr. Ruth Potee spoke really with I think, a very compelling presentation of medical information. And I'll say, and most of you know sort of my involvement in town government and my belief that it's important for people to vote, but it's important for people to cast an informed vote. There is a lot of information about this issue available. I really encourage you to get that information, whatever your perspective or whatever your assumptions. Approach this question with an open mind. Get the information from reliable sources, and on either side of the issue. But this is an opportunity for you to ask those questions and satisfy your own curiosity and your own assumptions about what it is you're actually voting on. And I really respectfully ask that you go through that process. So if you do have questions, please write them down and pass them up so that we can get more information tonight. And now I'm going to hand it off to Amy. Oh,
Can I
Sure.
just clarify one thing? I see some people looking puzzled as to where they're getting this card. My card was deep in the pocket here. Your cards are in the packet, and it looks like this. So it probably has slid down into the pocket. If you don't have one, we have spares. There's spares in the back.
And there's also pens in the back, too, if you need pens on the snack table. All right, so I'll make this brief. My name is Amy. I'm the director of the Health Department, and I'm going to speak solely on the lack of regulations that exist around this, because that's my role in this town. So some people may or may not know this, but Massachusetts is a home rule state, which means within the state, each locality, the cities and towns, get to make the regulations that the state puts forth stricter. We don't have the ability to make them less strict, but in all of our regulations that the health department has, we're allowed as a Board of Health to pass local regulations as strict as we want. This law is very different from that. We have no ability to regulate at a local level. So what that means is this law came through, and some of the comments you've heard today is about the edibles. Well, the way this law was written, the town of East Long Meadow cannot simply ban the edibles. This law was written as you have to accept it as a whole or deny it as a whole. So that puts us in an interesting situation as a community, because there may be some people who feel this is a positive thing, but because of our inability to regulate it, we're proposing a complete ban. The health department is usually able to inspect almost any establishment within the town to ensure safety of the food, proper preparation, to make sure the food comes from a reputable food source, proper labeling, and storage of the products. Under this law, we cannot go in and inspect. Under the law, the way it's written currently, there is no entity that can go in and inspect. So that's interesting. So a lot of people have compared this to the legalization of alcohol or tobacco. Well, alcohol and tobacco is regulated at both a federal, state, and local level. This, because it's illegal on a federal level, is not regulated on a federal level. Currently in Massachusetts, there's no regulations that exist around this because the Cannabis Control Commission is still trying to figure that out. And at a local level, the law has been written in a way that takes all of that away from us. So that's just the importance of why we're pursuing what we're doing. One other thing that we've been getting feedback on is this is working in Colorado and Washington. Why should it be different here? Well, just some quick points about that is that the laws in Colorado and Washington were written very differently than what was passed in Massachusetts. I'd just like to take a few minutes to let you know some of those differences because I think they're important. In Washington and Colorado, the municipality can set the tax rate for their town. This allows the towns to have some autonomy in what they want to do within their town. In Massachusetts, we are limited to 2%. And that is a very strong number. In talking to our town assessor, that is going to potentially equal $21,000 for us, which is remarkably lower than any of the other states. In Colorado and Washington, there are safety and security measures that are in place for the retail sale. And in Massachusetts, these are still not even discussed. The Cannabis Control Commission is still being created. In Washington and Colorado, they have seed-to-sale tracking, which means that you can find out what plant that the marijuana or the THC that you're consuming is from. In Massachusetts, there is no law. So just like a food recall, I can go into a store and say, all of these things were distributed to our Big Y. I'm going to go to Big Y and make sure all of these things are removed. And for a situation like this, if the food would be contaminated with any particulate matter or pesticides or chemicals, we would not have any way to track that into our local community. In Washington and Colorado, the localities have the ability to regulate the packaging and labeling. As you can see on some of our posters, the products that are being put forth look almost identical to their non-THC containing product. And so in other communities, they have the ability to regulate that it has to be look different than a commonly consumed food. It has to have the THC level amount that's in it prominently displayed, allergen labels, ingredients. And in Massachusetts, there are no current regulations about that. There are restrictions on advertising allowed in Washington and Colorado. In Massachusetts, we have regulations around the advertising of alcohol and tobacco. Currently, there are no regulations around where people can advertise this. It's for schools, you have to be so much yards away. With this, there are no regulations currently to protect our youth around that. In Colorado and Washington, there are potency limits. It means each individual city and town can say, you can't sell marijuana higher than X percentage of the THC, which is the active ingredient in the marijuana. For us, there are no provisions in the way the law was written, and the Cannabis Control Commission will not be even considering that by the way the law was written. There is no testing for mold, pesticides, and other contaminants, where in Colorado and Washington that is allowed. And in Colorado and Washington, they have standards for the police to use when considering an OUI case. And also, the way that the question 4 was written in Massachusetts, there are no expectations that that will be addressed in Massachusetts. One last piece that I'd like to point out is that we are not proposing this ban in isolation. There are approximately 27 communities in the state of Massachusetts that are proposing a ban, and approximately 57 communities that are proposing a moratorium. So this is, while it is something that the voters voted against in November, it is also something that other towns are recognizing. This regulation and this law has flaws, and the flaws aren't going to be addressed by our state by the time they go into effect. So your community, your leaders in your community are bringing this to you, so you guys have an opportunity to make an educated, informed decision. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from members of the panel? Follow-up? Questions?
So if you want to write, we'll take a 5-minute break. There's refreshments in the back. In your packets, you have an index card for questions. If you don't have a pen, they're on the back table. We'll leave a box up here. If you have a question, please write your name and your address on it. And if you're not from the town of East Long Meadow, please just indicate non-resident so we can make sure we know who is responding to these questions. If the time runs out and we don't have enough time to answer all your questions, we'll provide written answers to every single question we receive on the town website. So that every question will be addressed at some point, and if we don't have the appropriate person from town represented here tonight, we will get that answer and put it on the website.
All right, so refreshments in the back.
Take 5 minutes.
Take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back. Before I go to the questions, I'm going to just read the ballot question as it was written on the ballot, just so that information is clear. Shall the town prohibit the operation of all types? Let me clarify. The ballot question is proposed. Shall the town prohibit the operation of all types of marijuana establishments as defined in general laws, Chapter 94G, Section 1, including marijuana cultivators, marijuana testing facilities, marijuana product manufacturers, marijuana retailers, or any other type of licensed marijuana-related businesses within the town of East Long Meadow? And the summary: a yes vote would prohibit all commercial businesses related to marijuana, including marijuana cultivation, marijuana testing facilities, marijuana product manufacturing, marijuana retailers, or any other type of licensed marijuana-related businesses. This proposal would not prohibit the personal use of marijuana, growing of marijuana at a residence, or medicinal sales as permitted by law. Okay. So, first question. How soon after the June 6th, is it June 6th or June 8th?
June 6th.
June 6th, sorry about that. You gotta watch your moderators, who you pick for a moderator. How soon after the June 6th vote does the decision become effective?
As it currently stands, the Cannabis Control Commission is supposed to come out with their ruling sometimes before June 1st of 2018. The reason we're doing this now is because there is no state election before June 1st of 2018. The way the law was written is that the vote has to take place at an annual state election. So we don't have the luxury of waiting till the next round. The second part of that is, if there were to be a medical marijuana facility to open in town, as of June 1st, they would automatically be giving a recreational permit, even if the Cannabis Control Commission has not come forth with regulations or laws at that point. So that's part of the reason that there's so much concern here, is because after June 1st, if you have a medicinal facility, you're good to go. And there's nothing we can say about it, and the state may not have come down with regulations at that point.
Denise, I'm just putting you on the spot.
Okay.
Can you, microphone on that, I think you can start.
So just to clarify, the question is, I think once the vote is made, it's immediate, so it's effective immediately. Okay, I'm sorry. How's that? Is that better? All right. So the next question, will advertising be allowed to illuminate all the problems of not having any safety monitoring, inspections, safety labeling of marijuana edibles, warnings for children?
As it stands right now, with the way the law is written, there is absolutely nothing that requires any warning labels or anything on the product for people to know what's in it, or warnings like you see on cigarettes or on other medications, this may make you drowsy, etc. There's absolutely no labeling requirements whatsoever.
I apologize if I'm having a little bit of trouble. Is it illegal for minors ages 3 to 17, 18 to possess marijuana and buy it?
Yes.
Yes. How is banning one
I
establishment?
will say one thing on that, Don.
Oh, go ahead, sure.
Possession of under 17 is a civil infraction with the penalties of some kind of civil fine and mandatory drug education issued through the courts. Whether or not that actually happens, I hope it does. I wish it does, but under 18 is just a civil fine of $100.
How is banning one establishment that sells marijuana stop children in town from driving across to, I guess, to be able to purchase these projects from surrounding towns, if surrounding towns allow sales?
That is a very good question. It does not stop them, although children shouldn't be buying marijuana in retail establishments at all because it's illegal to sell it to people under the age of 21. However, our concern in East Long Meadow is the environment in which we live. So as marijuana, the perception of it as being normal, and that more and more people use it, becomes more pervasive among young people. We have seen use in this state and in other states that have legalized it either for medical use or for recreational use. We have seen youth use go up. So as the perception of the harm of it or the perception of the normalcy of it goes, if perception of harm goes down, the perception that it's normal goes up, use goes up. Our concern in this town is that with having it in town, easily accessible, especially with no restrictions on advertising, seen by our youth, that they will perceive this as being more normal and less harmful. And therefore, as research has shown, when something seems less harmful and more normal, use goes up. That is our concern in East Long Meadow.
One other thing real quick is public health initiatives, like I mentioned earlier, rarely happen in isolation. The more communities that pass this, the more communities that are going to look into it. Like I said, there's already 27 communities pursuing a ban and 57 communities pursuing a moratorium. That is going to limit access in our town and other towns and further towns past that. The question that we're putting on the ballot in the summary are the same wording that other communities who have already banned it, like Westboro, are using. So the question that was written is a very common argument. We can just go across the border. But public health initiatives are better together.
I also think more importantly, or as importantly, we're not just talking about a ban on the sale in East Long Meadow. We've committed to educating people, so having events like tonight so people understand what the risks are. Because we won't change people's ability to go across a line and get something someplace. So part of it is education. And that's what a public health mission is. And 2 weeks ago, we had a workshop on drug use, et cetera. We'll continue to do this. We've met with the PTOs of each one of the schools in town so that we can educate the schools about what's going on. And that education will be a continued part of what we do. So the ban, to your point, or whoever's question, is just part of it, and we realize that's not enough.
Can I just say one more quick thing? In Massachusetts, we know that about 80% of current users started using before the age of 21. So young people are very susceptible to advertising and what they see out in the community. That was part of the tobacco's strategy in getting people hooked on smoking when they were young, to continue to have customers as they age. So it's a similar kind of thing going on here. We just want to limit the amount of what our young people are seeing so that we can hopefully delay their use until they're older.
Gordon.
Thank you. I was just going to support actually what has been said around education, that hopefully it's not simply a ballot question, that as we go from PTO meetings, we go from forums like this, there are more discussions that are going on in homes, going on around the town, and certainly in our health classes, these are issues that we discuss, and we want to give as much information as we can to our students so that they're making good decisions based on accurate information.
So next question, what steps are being taken to educate the townspeople on the facts as they were presented tonight?
I think we just covered that. Yeah, we covered a little bit of that, but we're going to be continuing to do other activities even with parents. I think that's also an important group that we're going to be reaching out to specifically to really inform parents of all the resources that they might have available in addition to knowing the facts. Because it's one thing to know something, but what you can do about it is going to be just as important as well. And we want to be able to provide the tools and the resources for everyone in the community to be able to contribute and help, so from parents to schools to any caring adult in the community, that everyone has that information. And there might be different opportunities for us to be able to do that, including even using LCAT to be able to get that information out. So we definitely, as a board, will be working to look at what programs or what resources or what interventions would be appropriate so that everybody in the town will have the information they need to make sure that we protect our children and our youth.
What are Long Meadow, Wilbraham, and Hamden doing on this issue?
We have a spreadsheet. What's the first one?
What's that?
Long Meadow,
Long
Hamden,
Meadow.
and Wilbraham.
Long Meadow,
Surrounding.
Hamden, yeah, Long Meadow, Wilbraham, and Hamden. Karen, can you, I think you have room on that cord to really
Wilbraham
push
has a
that.
proposed ban, and
Just
the other
slide
two
those
don't
in there.
have anything that they're doing right now. I will say part of the reason for that, oh, sorry. Loud enough. I will say part of the reason for that is that issue that I raised earlier. Our elections happen after when the law is going to take place on June 1st. A lot of the other communities around us have town meetings, which usually happen in April and May. So they have the luxury of letting time pass before they have to move forward with this. Because of our form of government and that we have an annual election after June 1st, we don't have another ability after this one. So the answer is the only town around us that's doing something is, what did I say this?
Wilbraham.
Wilbraham.
Part two of that question, or second question from that questioner is, will the police department have officers at the places of sale if this passes, checking often?
Checking off.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's programs in place through the state that do check ID for alcohol buying procedures, and that's done through the health department, right, too, I think. Right, Amy?
Compliance checks.
Compliance
I've been
checks?
able to do them.
Huh?
Compliance checks.
For like cigarettes, you do that?
When we have
Well, right, but there's programs in place for that.
Correct.
We won't have any program in place other than to monitor, just like if we believe an illegal sale of alcohol took place at a package store, if we have probable cause to believe, a reasonable suspicion to believe that took place, we would act on that. And I would assume to be the same procedure for the recreational sale of marijuana. If we have reasonable suspicion that illegal activities are taking place, mostly the minors under the age of 21, then we would act on that.
So compliance checks happen for alcohol establishments and tobacco establishments, generally just a few times a year, and generally only in communities that have grant funding to do compliance checks. So I don't know when the last time, that was one of the data points we tried to collect when doing our community assessment, when the last time compliance checks were done in East Long Meadow, I could not tell you. So to add another form of compliance checking when we're not even able to compliance check what we already have would probably be difficult.
Okay, all set. Thank you. How long do the effects of marijuana stay in a person's system?
Good question.
Doctors?
So part of what we're actually talking about is the acute effect and the long-term effect. So the acute effect is going to wear off in a matter of hours, 8-10 hours. It gets deposited in your fat tissue, so it might stay in your system. But the most important thing is that we're concerned that the brain, the effects on the brain and the adolescent brain are irreversible. All right, are irreversible because the brain is being formed at that time. And those effects, there's 2 studies that I know of, one that was done in the Netherlands and one that was done down in North Carolina at Duke University, that has tracked this over 30 years. Not great studies, but it's all we have. IQ points go down by about 5 points and they do not recover. Okay, so the biggest concern is that this is a lasting effect on a brain that is not ready to make the decision that they can do this. The other side of that coin is if you start smoking it at 30, I'm not sure it hurts you.
The other part has to do also with the way that it's ingested. So this is why the edibles issue is such a critical issue, because people start consuming, you're eating. This takes a little bit longer to sort of, have that psychoactive effect that you're waiting for, and it also lasts longer in your body, so that people will consume it and may end up consuming more than they should. So that's the whole issue with how long that it takes and how long your body keeps it will be different when you ingest it as an edible versus if you're smoking it or taking something that's just in the mouth.
And the effect on your body can also be determined by, again, the method. So there are some concentrates out there now. The average amount of THC grown in plant marijuana right now, as we know it, is about 16, which is about double what it was in the 70s. But there are concentrates, oils, and things that can be put into a vape pen and used in other ways that are very, very popular among the young adult set right now. These concentrates have been found to be up to in the 90% THC, which can be incredibly dangerous and have led some young people to have psychotic episodes and be harmed because of these psychotic episodes. So that's another concern.
How will the town advertise this most important and detrimental? I think the effects of, the person thinks the effects of it are detrimental, but how will you advertise the vote for the town and the community so people will know and remember the June 6th date?
Currently, the health department has plans to do a mailer. So before the June election, we're going to be sending out, similar to your recycling cards that you get every year, we're going to send out with the question that will have the wording, so people can see the actual question, the summary, and then on the back it will have some education components as well.
The other part of that is that this particular town election doesn't have a lot of things happening on it, which means that less people tend to show up. So part of the strategy is not just that you receive it at home, but that you talk to your family, neighbors, friends, colleagues, and everything else, and everyone else, and please tell them about the vote on June 6th, because that's the way that people are going to show up. The interesting thing about this whole situation is that as health professionals and other professionals here, we are giving our professional opinion about this situation, the marijuana. We also are residents in town as well, and we all have children or raise their families here as well. The only way that change happens is when people actually show up. If you don't show up and voice your opinion and your thoughts around this, other people will make them for you, which means the regulations from the state level, with whatever limited regulations will be put or all the things that have already been told, that is what we're going to have to work with, and we will no longer have the ability to be able to go back and go, oh, we don't want that you now have passed down. So it is really very important that although we might be mailing things, although we may be sending phone calls, although you might see me on the side of the road with the sign or one of us or other people, that actually isn't enough. It's going to be all of us talking to each other, encouraging each other, and actually showing up to vote.
Another piece of that is if you know of an organization or you're part of a organization or part of a community within the community, we're happy to come and speak to them. I'm happy to do it during the day after business hours. We also have a wealth of knowledge on the board. So if there's somewhere you think we should go to talk about this, please let us know.
So this is a good follow-up question to your comments. Are Colorado and Washington the only other states which have legalized marijuana? And why are the regulations regarding marketing and packaging, et cetera, so lenient in Massachusetts? And can that change?
Okay. We're not there's varying levels of legalization across the country. So we're not the only ones that have legalized recreational marijuana. It's also Alaska, California, there might be one other. If you look at a map of the United States and you look at the states that have either legalized it for medicinal purposes or recreational purposes, the states that have legalized for recreational purposes, like we just have, light up when it comes to use rates, current use rates. So the highest use rates in the country are in the states that have full legalization. And it's very, very clear. It's Alaska, California, Washington. Colorado is all by itself, right in the middle of the country. And then a lot of New England, with Massachusetts at the epicenter of that. When you look at legalization for medicinal marijuana, they have the next highest use rates. The states that have not legalized at all or have only legalized CBD oil for medicinal purposes, which can be useful for certain conditions, have the lowest use rates, usually below national average. And I forgot what the second part of the question was.
Well, so can they change?
Why was it written this way? The law in Massachusetts I don't know how else to say this. Quite frankly, it was written by people from the industry. So they're learning from the other states how to write the laws so that the industry can best flourish in the state. However you feel about that, that's the only thing I can think of why it was written this way. It was also it was a referendum. It was written by people, not by legislators. Can it be changed? They're trying to. There have been, I think, 4 or 5 hearings now across the state where people were able to go and make public comment. And there's a panel, there's a whole committee, a joint committee that is looking at this, and they're going to be responsible for perhaps amending the law to include some of the things that we've talked about today. But as Amy already said, that could be a very long process, and we're not sure when that will be done.
So this one, maybe I can answer this, but for those who are unable to vote on June 6th, will there be an opportunity to vote in the future, or then parenthetically by absentee ballot? It's a regular town election, so there will be an absentee ballot available. My suggestion is that you contact the clerk's office and request an absentee ballot if you're not going to be in town to vote at the polls, and you will be able to vote with that ballot as you would at any other regular town election. If we do not regulate, is there a limit to how many pot shops can open in East Long Meadow?
I think there is.
We would have to pass community bylaws. So if this does not pass in the June election, the next step would be for the planning board to develop laws just around the same way that they do around other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so then there's, we have 2 cards left here. Sort of a comment at the beginning. I'm unable to understand any positive reason for marijuana other than strict medical reasons. Why add more problems? How did it ever get this far? And the question, money for the government, perhaps.
So, marijuana is no worse than alcohol is. Okay, and we have alcohol is totally legal, right? Alcohol on the developing brain is not good. That's why we don't allow you to drink until over age 21. And those bottles are separate. They look differently. Our edibles, if you look over there, they look like Kit Kats. They look like gummy bears. They look like the kids' food that kids eat. At least our alcohol bottles look different, right? So on the mature brain, there's no evidence that it increases the risk of cancer. Okay, so smoking cigarettes increases your risk of cancer. We know that, that's been proven. Marijuana doesn't, to our knowledge. Having said that, we haven't studied it as long. We don't use it as openly as we do cigarette smoking. So I don't know the downside of it. But from all the information that we know, it is really no different and probably safer than alcohol. But alcohol is not necessarily good for you either if you do too much of it. And if you start it at a young age, you're going to damage your brain as well.
In terms of the other part, how did we get here? I think most of us are curious to understand that. And I don't think I've yet come across an actual analysis of how did we get here, but I think that there's a lot of assumptions and questions. You know, the legalization of marijuana, probably people have been advocating for it for a very long time. This isn't brand new stuff. But things tend to happen in a particular context. So the question kind of alluded to the government making money. If you look at maybe the timeline of when some of this work started, really one is decriminalizing, and then the next step might have been the medical marijuana, and now we're at the recreational marijuana. you can make certain assumptions about the timeline, right? Our fiscal crisis had happened in 2007, 2008. In some places, the decriminalization began to happen in 2008. In 2012, I think at least here, it was the legalization of medicinal marijuana and so forth. This is just my thought process. But what I'm saying is that, sometimes context matters. And context matters even more now because we also do have an opioid crisis that's happening. So things don't happen in isolation. And this is a very tough time to be able to address this issue because we're dealing with a lot more. So why did it happen? I think, you can't put your finger on one thing, but I think that you can look at, sort of a series of things, and, timing is everything. I think that the industry might have thought that this was the time that they will, as people begin to be more accepting of something, then they're more likely to then take the next step. So if we're going to be more accepting of medicinal, then it's most likely that when they put recreational, people have started to begin to change their views on it. So, from a personal point of view, is if you look at who wrote the law and you look at the series of events, you can put a few of those dots together. But that's all I'll say on that.
All right, so I have one last card here, and I'm going to do my best. This is, I think this is somewhat of a comment, but if I may, maybe try to formulate a question out of it. So there are situations in which a person may be limited in, as you have it here, sir, when one is substantially limited in major life activities, is considered by the ADA to be disabled or protected from state and local government. I guess really the basis of the question is a person who is there a risk of, I guess, harassing people, right, who are handicapped or who are maybe using, is that, how much of this is an issue?
Well, this particular ban is referring.
No. Sir. I think, though, sir, if I may, that what we're really talking about has nothing to do with issues around enforcement of people who may or may not be. This is a ban on the retail sale of a product in town. That's the question at hand tonight. So, while there may be other concerns, I don't think this is the forum to address them.
Thank you.
Any other follow-up comments from the panel? What's that? That's all the questions. Did I miss? I have the whole pile here. That's it?
So the call to action.
You want to do that? So this evening, we really appreciate again that you've been here and you've attended. I think there's several things when we think about what we can do, each of us as individuals. And the most important thing is to be able to leave here and talk to someone else in the town about this, what you've learned tonight, and what, we're asking people to show up on June 6th to be able to vote. We would like you to support the ban on retail sale of recreational marijuana, but it's uniquely an opportunity for you to voice your thoughts on this issue. So that's the very first thing that I think that you should do tonight. The other thing is that moving forward, you'll be able to follow the Department of Health, both on, if you use social media, you can go on the website, you can go on social media, which is using the Facebook page. There'll be updates on that, as well as also a Twitter. And if neither of those things or none of those things are things that interest you at all, I'm sure you can call the department directly, and we will be able to figure out how to answer your questions. So the call to action is to be able to go to the ballot. And if there's anything else that we can do to go out into the community and present at any community-based organization, churches, groups, small, big, please contact the Department of Health and we'll arrange to make that happen as well. Anything else?
Right, I'd like to thank our panelists. I know coming out on evenings is something you guys do often, but to be here to help us explain these things to the community is very much appreciated. And then also we'd like to thank you guys. We can't get our message out and we would have no one to talk to if you guys didn't show up. So thank you for showing an interest and thank you for coming.